evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Executive Roundtable. This is the 2026 Cyber Threat Landscape, and we're hosting this on behalf of the Merseyside branch of the BCS Chartered Institute for IT. So, before we dive in, a brief word about why events like this matter. The BCS Merseyside branch is renewed, reinvigorated. We exist to foster a sense of belonging and build mutual support amongst IT professionals across this local area. And we're here to provide a platform for networking, professional development, and real engagement on the issues that shape our profession. And perhaps cybersecurity is an issue that shapes in a way that many of us are scarred by. Tonight's a perfect example of this type of thing in action. We're bringing together practitioners, researchers, and leaders to share hard-won knowledge and experience in a space where we can all learn from one another. So whether you're a CTO, an IT manager, or a professional trying to make sense of this fast-moving threat landscape, you're in exactly the right place. Tonight's session is a practitioner-led event. We won't be dealing in theory. We'll be hearing from people who are working on these problems every day in organisations of all shapes and sizes. And we've structured the evening around 5 focused discussion rounds covering security, complexity and regulation, supply chain risk, identity and resilience, and we've got a bit of time for some Q&A at the end. I think I was going to say a little bit about the way in which cybersecurity has changed in the very recent time. I was at the airport going on my summer holiday, and I found a book by Andy Greenberg, and he's one of a number of authors who've really brought the dark origins of cybercrime to the broader public through almost thriller-like books. This isn't just about disgruntled teenagers in a bedroom somewhere creating havoc. The activity that we're now seeing being perpetrated is orchestrated at a national level with significant funding. And just 2 days ago, I was at the Microsoft AI tour in London, where the VP for security opened with a line that I think sets tonight's tone somewhat perfectly. There are 2 types of motorbike rider. There are those that have gone down, and there are those that are going to go down. And the message for all of us is clear. The question isn't really whether we're an organisation that will face a cyber incident. It's whether you'll be ready when that happens. And I'll admit, to a personal perspective on this, in a past life as a director of operations, I used to dread being on call and covering for the CISO and others when they actually needed some time off. When that out of hours call comes in, it's not a feeling that you forget. So before we go any further, I want to acknowledge something, that the people on the panel tonight and the many others like them in our profession have chosen to make this responsibility their career. And they carry it not just over the bank holidays, but every day. So I have enormous respect for that. And I think it's worth saying so right at the outset. So with that, let me hand across to some of our panelists tonight. So some introductions. And we'll start with Mike. Over to you, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Shores. I'm the Deputy CISO at Elanco Animal Health. Elanco does research and discovery on animal pharmaceuticals in pets and livestock. So if you have a pet and you go to the vet, you may come across Elanco products. So I am responsible for all of the risk compliance, the security operations and architecture across Elanco. We're a global company, so I work with legal teams and business teams across the world. And we really promote the engineering first approach. We build and create solutions to attempt to reduce risk as much as possible across all the various business units. And ensure that we protect the uptime of our manufacturing and the safety of our employees in those sites, and also ensuring that we can protect our IP and go-to-market strategies.
Thanks, Mike. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Nick. I work for a business called Inspired. We are an energy consultancy business that provides ESG services, construction services, energy efficiency services, procurement to businesses predominantly in the UK. We were on the stock market. We were a PLC up until the summer, and we've just been taken off the stock market, and we're now working with some PE houses to transform the business for the next stage of its evolution. In terms of scale, I've been in the business for 10 years. We started with, when I joined, there was about 100 staff, and then we went through some M&A activities to get it to about the 800 size, and now we're looking at the next level of expansion. And I'm always looking for how to just keep things simple. So what Chris mentioned at the beginning there about heart racing when things go wrong, maybe we'll touch on some of the experiences of other people in this group during the conversations tonight. But when things go wrong, you just want everything to be as simple as possible. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Nick. Alina.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Alina Fesu, and I'm a cybersecurity PhD researcher and associate lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University. My work focuses on anomaly detection and cyber resilience in resource-constrained environments. So I'm particularly interested in practical security approaches that work for small, medium enterprises operating under real-world constraints. And before academia, I used to work for F5 Networks across the UK and EMEA, and that gave me visibility into how security is adopted across SME and large organizations. And I actually really appreciate the opportunity to contribute to such a critical topic tonight.
Thanks, Alina. Now, we're expecting a few other speakers for tonight's session, and I'm not sure that if they're with us, because sometimes people sign in under a pseudonym and they've got another identity. So just checking if we've got Mohammed Usman on with us. Okay. And what about Jerry Chukwudi? And the other person we were expecting was Ugo. Okay, so I've just had a message to say that Mohammed is joining us soon. So I think on that basis, we will try and keep things moving along because our time schedule was somewhat limited. We have a series of topics to kind of go through tonight. And the first one was around security convergence. And this is one that's it's a sort of theme that's dominated conversations this week down in London. And one of the things where convergence is becoming really apparent is through AI. So AI is creating a whole new set of attack surfaces. We're seeing agentic AI systems that can act autonomously, accessing data across platforms, making decisions without human intervention at almost every step. And Microsoft's own data shows that AI-powered attacks are already 4 times more effective when it comes to phishing than their conventional equivalents. 88% of organizations that Microsoft had surveyed concerned about indirect prompt injection attacks, which is a new threat vector that barely existed a couple of years ago. Further, the subject matter experts in the field, there's a sort of an acute tension, and new tools are emerging to give cybersecurity experts a means to try and tackle this. I wondered for those on the panel, does this resonate? Is this the lived reality for practicing professionals in the field these days?
So as a business, who are you trying to protect yourself against? Are you trying to protect yourself from nation state attackers, in which case I would suggest that you've got to be structured in a very different way. My view is that as for my business, in a business-to-business energy utility market, I would describe it as I'm trying to protect against drive-by shooters. Apologies if that's a terminology that affects, but I'm wanting to make sure my attack surface is. There was a film, because what was it called, The Grey Man, where you're just the person that's not the least visible person, so that people just go past you. I can see Mike's nodding, and that's my piece. There's something that you might be interested in is ransomware 3.0. That's worth a Google. And this stuff scares me. But effectively, it is just increasing the volume of of potentiality. And if you've got your right controls in place and your right systems, and your staff, which is the weak point, which you back to your phishing piece, as long as you've got the things like that in place, that's more that I worry about is the drive-by. I can't defend against a nation-state attacker. It's cheaper for somebody to employ a bad actor in my organisation than try and hack a firewall or something bad like that.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I have the same view, right? Where the AI-enabled attacks are just increasing the scale at which people can go after lots of companies at the same time. And the issue often, particularly with third parties, is that once they hit someone that you're connected with, they can glean information and then dynamically use AI to add context to those emails. So those phishing emails become super realistic, right? They have context. They have information that, you know, we've trained for a long time, right, on what a phishing email looks like and what to look out for. And they can almost play the long game now with AI, where it doesn't have to initially have a phishing link in it. They can build up a story over multiple emails with that context and do that at fairly low effort, right? Because they're essentially automating that workflow for them. So that becomes a really problematic issue, right? That scale, our traditional detections aren't seeing those things as well as we'd like, and we're also seeing it in multiple places, right? Not just phishing emails, but also just accidental errors, right? A lot of issues I worry about is also my users just making a really bad error and doing things that either enable threat actors, right? Or particularly with AI, there's an evolving kind of regulatory angle as well that worries me about how are my users using AI, and is that going to cause me an incident that might cut close to regulation or enabling someone to get information. So, you know, having that control surface, both what services users are actually using, what information are they putting in these services, and how might that be used against us in an attack. So they're very similar worries, but the scale is something that I think's a problem, but it doesn't really change I've heard a lot that it's not. I think people were fearful this was going to change what threats exist and create new things, but you know, the reality is it's just scaling and automating existing techniques, and that's just as much of a big problem as new threats might have been, but it does enable us to get hit, you know, at a greater scale and rate.
Right, thanks so much for that. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Mohammed Usman, who's now joined us as a computer scientist with a rich background in this field. Mohammed, one of the stats that I heard on Tuesday was that 80% of executives now fear the data oversharing within their organisation, and that this represents an additional route for attackers to come in on. Have you got a view on that from your perspective? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I mean, there is a recent legislation which put responsibility of cybersecurity responsibility on boardroom instead of keeping it on the technical side alone. So that's a major shift. That's a major shift in the legal landscape. So now this has, I mean, multiple dimensions in terms of making them more, educating them more at the board level, and also being as a decision maker, so they are more involved they are more involved about the defense side of this whole thing. So what I can see when it comes to SMEs, especially in SME sector, um, there are four angles with respect to agentic AI, threat landscape, and adoption. Um, of course, we can begin with the SME adoption of AI, where there is a productivity gain, lot of productivity gain, but still the adaptability itself, practically speaking, it's a challenge. We can say there are tools like Copilot and other tools which are being adopted by SMEs, but those are tools provided by third parties and beyond. So those are not in-house adoption. So in general, I mean, in general, there is a lot of gap in terms of technically securing SMEs because of the lack of the manpower. Recently, I was working on a funding call application where I was going through the job specifications for the IT people hired by SMEs. So it is surprising to see that the very few of them even mentioned about AI related threats. So that's about the technical role. But when we see at the board level, I think the understanding of threat landscape, the impact it can have, uh, there is a huge gap around that area. So this is sometimes exploited uh, by attackers, and especially considering the geopolitical position we have in the global politics. So not only our main core critical infrastructure is targeted by sometimes even state-sponsored attackers, they penetrate elsewhere as well. So SMEs is one of the vulnerable areas with the more enhanced capabilities those people have now. So yeah, it's a high risk zone, and it's a lot to do in terms of translating that legislative umbrella into more of high level strategic decision making, understanding of that nature of the decision making, and then boiling that down to operational level. So yeah, this is one of the vulnerable area which I see, and I think NCSC has issued recently a guideline about this, and especially when we relate this with the quantum and post-quantum security defense mechanism. So there's a clear guideline on adoption of post-quantum by 2035 across the board, and by 2030 in the government sector. So there are some initiatives in terms of translating that legislative requirement into more of a ground level thing. But I think probably uh, we need to step up as a nation to protect our digital space across the board. Yeah, that's my view.
Thank you so much. That's a nice lead into the next round of discussion around sort of regulatory complexity, and I think that complexity is growing. The NIS2 has sort of expanded the scope significantly. And one of the things that I've observed is that increasingly in procurement, we're seeing the bar being raised. This isn't just about national regulation. This is about companies selecting partners to work with them in a more diligent way. Mike, Nick, this seems to be an area that you've got some expertise in. What's your view on the landscape as it stands here? The risks seem now to be beyond just financial penalties.
Yeah, they're definitely. Yeah, I think we've come from a world, right, where a lot of regulation said you should have good security practices, and a lot of companies were left with looking at best practices and having to implement things that they felt were appropriate for their company. They're getting more stringent, right? We're getting more directive from governments and around the world now, actually, on particularly in the privacy space and kind of protecting some of the kind of customer and sensitive data, making sure that there's really strict security measures around that. And it was mentioned earlier, this really starts to create a new dynamic within companies, particularly between the executives and the board, about what their liability and responsibilities are. A lot of NIS2 has, a lot of technical controls. They worry me, to be honest, less. The thing that really has taken a lot of time from me is in the reporting mechanisms, my classification in different countries. There's a lot of complexity, particularly with animal health. Are we part of the food supply chain? Are we not? So there's been a lot of conversations, probably more than I wanted, with lawyers about the language in different regulations. Obviously, the EU is implementing that at different speeds. And so that's a bit of a headache, to be honest. And then we also have some ambiguity, right? There's a line around the board is trained. And one of my first questions was, well, what does that mean? And the lawyer said, well, that's all it says. So figure it out. So there's a lot of ambiguity, and I see that, a lot in these sort of regulations, where I think companies are left with having to interpret a lot of what's said. Not everything is fully thought through in the law, and also how it marries up with other regulations. I've recently come across regulations in certain EU countries that completely contradict each other, and we're sat in front of regulators going, well, which one do you want us to choose? Which one do we go with? And so it gets really complicated in how you decide kind of where to align. I generally attempt to ensure that I am not the odd one out. I don't want to do something completely different to my peers and others in the animal health industry. So I attempt to align with what is everyone else doing, because it feels like a good justification to say, well, this is how everyone's interpreted it. So that kind of is where I start to align to. And it's really enabled a new level of engagement, I think, with the board, given that they do have these now new kind of requirements around their liability, which is good engagement, but also means that they're more interested. So it generates more work that is potentially more paperwork than actually delivering protections.
Thanks, Mike. So while you were talking, I saw Nick crack a smile more than once. Nick, I suppose the question that I was thinking about while I was listening to Mike was, if you're talking to some colleagues and they're on the fence, possibly thinking that NIS2 compliance doesn't apply to them, what would you say to them?
Well, actually, I'm in that camp. So NIS2, I know the scope's broadened, and I'm hoping, Mike, I'm in that little grey area where it's not quite coming over to my organisation just yet. However, this conversation is aimed for the SME market, and one of the topics was security as a growth enabler, and I wanted to just share that I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with Cyber Essentials Plus, and I think that should be a legal requirement for every organisation in the UK to have Cyber Essentials Plus. I think it's a brilliant, little, relatively easy, basic set of rules and guidance that also educates the business. So I think there's so in my line, Mike, I'm not as deep into NIS2 and the regulations as you. By getting Cyber Essentials Plus 10 years ago, we started to win some new business for the organisation. From that, I then moved into ISO 27001. And that then started to win more business, and that's sustained us till now. And we've now just embarked on NIST, which is it's a US framework, with the intention of moving into SOC 2 compliance this time next year. But all of these are because we've got traction and we get our client base has changed. Our client base has evolved into larger multinational organizations that are looking for these types of logos. So I would describe some of this topic as legal requirements you just have to have, and other parts of this topic as these are logos you need to open the doorway on tenders to grow your business. I've been fortunate that I've been able to do a reasonable amount of work with the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, and I do find these organisations brilliant. I think the ICO is first class, and both and fair. So as well as it being the law, in the green room might mention the grey areas. There are the grey areas in topics like GDPR and stuff. So, but where in my experience, the regulator has been able to provide guidance on those grey areas and support both the data subject and both the organisation. I often think our role is just about being good citizens. If we are charged with looking after somebody's data, then we need to be making sure we're doing the right thing. And if you have that as a mantra, then normally the right decisions get made. But I would certainly encourage, I'm not sure what the makeup is of folk on this call in terms of the size of their organizations and stuff, but I don't do business with organizations that don't have Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001. And so I'll give an example. A couple of years ago, somebody wanted to buy hampers for all of our staff. So 800 staff across the UK, they wanted a Christmas hamper to be sent out to these people. That means that 800 addresses, home addresses, need to be issued out. And lovely idea. How are they going to control it? It turned out is effectively a one-man band with a laptop and no other controls around it. So we ended up finding an alternative that was protected the data. So the idea was great and lovely and wholesome, but the risk to the business of that spreadsheet containing 800 home addresses and names just accidentally going somewhere, it wasn't worth it in the end. So we found an alternative provider.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite a nice lead into our next round of discussion, which is around supply chain risk. And I think one of the uncomfortable truths that we all face is that sophisticated attackers have learned that the most hardened enterprise targets can be exploited via the supply chain route. And we've seen some quite high-profile cases of this, like the SolarWinds attack, the MoveIt vulnerability, and others have sort of demonstrated that a single weak link in that supply chain can have real consequence. Alina's a bit of an expert in this resilience and for resource-constrained environments. Alina, what's your take on this?
So I would rather introduce myself as an expert in the making. So I think all the points made so far tie into this topic precisely, and what you said earlier and what Mike was mentioning in terms of AI tool proliferation. I think that that is making a lot of the contemporary issues that we're confronting ourselves today, especially for small and medium enterprises. Often we use open source components and AI tooling, but many of these components are fast moving, community driven, and they're not fully audited or provenance verified. So this dramatically increases the dependency depth and uncertainty. For example, for a single application, tracing every nested package, every plugin, every API integration or AI model dependency can feel like going down a rabbit hole. And that's even before considering shadow AI and other shadow tools that are being used within organizations. We've already seen how development environments, package managers, and update mechanisms become attack vectors, from dependency poisoning to malicious update prompts that might look legitimate, as Mike was mentioning. AI is making everything look so much legitimate nowadays, and it can trick users even those with experience sometimes. We saw recently, for example, the client CLI and PM package compromised to distribute a malicious component. And that wasn't a vulnerability in the traditional sense. It was trust and token governance failure. For example, even in AI augmented campaigns, like the recent FortiGate attacks, the entry point was exposed via management interfaces and weak authentication. So it wasn't a sophisticated zero-day exploit. And this shows just how quickly development ecosystems can become supply chain vectors. And as Mohammed was mentioning earlier, and Nick was making a good point as well about legislation and how SMEs are expected to adhere to these, to comply, same as large organizations. But is that something that they can actually do? Because we know small, medium enterprises usually have lower budget and not necessarily a dedicated security team. So for them, it's much harder to comply to such norms. And the challenge is that they operate, as I said, with limited teams and limited security budgets. So the question isn't whether security is important for them, it's how to implement it so that they proportionally can implement it and sustain it. And I believe that security maturity has become a commercial differentiator, as Mohammed was mentioning. And the key issue is proportionality. So they don't need to necessarily employ an enterprise scale SOC team, but they do need to have a disciplined identity control, clear API governance and visibility into their cloud posture. And if we treat security requirements purely as compliance hurdles, then SMEs, I think, will struggle. However, if we treat them as resilience enablers and commercial trust signals, they become strategic assets.
Right. I wonder if I could bring Mohammed in on this. One of the things that I heard recently was that APIs are described as the soft underbelly of the modern tech stack, and that good API security hygiene is actually a significant thing that we should be looking at in more detail. Mohammed, have you got a view on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is quite close to agentic AI we're talking about. Agentic AI is all about it becomes autonomous decision making, and how I see this infrastructure, I don't see SMEs isolated from rest of the infrastructure. Or, how I foresee in future, there are different agents. You call them APIs, machine-to-machine communication, the old terminology now in the realm of AI. We can call them agentic AI, and then, of course, this is a very loose analogy, not tightly technically, the similar layer, but they work quite similarly. So when we say SMEs operate and they do business with the clients, they work with the supply chain, providers. They work with government regulators for compliance purposes. They do international businesses. So attack surface and the nature of interaction is not limited to in-house business, or in-house. So that is a kind of a global interaction in certain situations they have to do. So this is where they become globally exposed. So what I believe, what I foresee, I think we need to move towards having some sort of central compliant architecture that can act as a national gatekeeper for any, I mean, this may be a controversial idea in terms of we are living in a country where we have democracy and we don't have national level firewalls. But in terms of security, this is where we have to come up with some sort of trustworthy infrastructure that can provide protection to SMEs, individuals, small scale actors. This cannot be put onto those tiny organizations with very limited budgets, with the staff, a single staff member in some cases, trying to do every operation, IT related operation. So that's a real threat and especially in the future, where I can foresee we are moving toward integrated infrastructure. So some of the SMEs deal with defense sector, some with energy sector, some with transportation, some other critical national infrastructure. So they have to come at par in terms of securing their own automated, autonomous, agentic infrastructure. So there needs to be, alone legislation cannot serve the purpose here, how I see it. There needs to be some central national level activity needs to be started. And for that, we actually have recently proposed a project that is an idea of having a central fiber, trustworthy fiber that can provide a legislative compliance to autonomous agents that work across multiple sectors within the UK, and that can actually uh, provide digital trustworthy signatures at low level operations of agentic AI. So this is how I see that's one of the potential future area we are headed towards. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that insight. I learned something there that I didn't know before. One of the areas that I think is kind of perceived as the main battleground in cybersecurity is identity. We've come a long way in our thinking from the perimeter-based security models evolved, and if they weren't already on the way out, I think the pandemic and the move to hybrid working kind of has accelerated that. The thing that's come along to replace it is zero trust architecture, a thing that is still significantly misunderstood by many executives in my experience. And I can see Nick smiling there because I'm going to bring him into this conversation shortly. I think that the reality perhaps needs to be somewhat simpler. We kind of need to start with knowing what identities exist within our environments, right, Nick? Is it that simple, or do we need to be thinking about this in a more nuanced way?
So I'll be honest, out of all the topics we're talking about, this is the one I'm really upset that the colleague that was on the interview panel is not here to help with this topic. I've been working in IT for 30 odd years. I'm cynical, and zero trust is something that was being pushed down our throats by many organizations selling software solutions 5 years ago, 6 years ago, or actually maybe sooner. It's been overtaken by people selling AI solutions now down our throats every day, and these adverts keep coming up. But it's not a technology solution, I don't think, Chris. I think it's more of a methodology, and I'm going to try and get my way through this. If I'm starting to lose track, please just shout. The principles are verifying that your users are your users, and you can do some sensible stuff. So, for example, in my space, my HR workflow is directly integrated in with my Microsoft workflow. So, a leaver, on the point that they leave, they are executed from the IT system, and they are also cache credentials because they're remote workers, their laptops are forcibly rebooted, cache credentials are removed, and we have an audit trail to verify. So for my leavers, to make sure that the bad people, it's the wrong phrase, sorry, but you know what I mean. Make sure that people are gone. They're gone. Built into our standard systems that reasonable SMEs sizes that are using Entra, you've got conditional access policies. So the principles of IT, which have not changed for decades, something that you know, something that you are, something that you have. And so conditional access policies where only authorized devices are allowed to connect when presented with something that you know, username, password, or something that you are, an authenticator, MFA prompt, something like that. The concept of least privileged access. So I've got an administration team, and none of them are administrators until the point that they actually require administration access, and then they go and request it. and they request it, and then another colleague authorises that approval, and there's an audit trail. It's not onerous and it's not rocket science, this sort of stuff, and it's built into the standard products. It doesn't necessarily cost money. Minimising your attack surface. Mohammed talked about some services and things like that you can get at a country scale. I would recommend people go onto the NCSE website, and on there, free of charge, they will do port scans across your network and send you a report every day. They will also validate your email security for you and send you and give you some really nice tips and stuff how to improve it. So working and actually getting resources that you can train your employees with, there's some really good infographics that they've got, is there on the NCSE site. The other part of zero trust, which is always assuming breach. And so I take a view that if we're not compromised, we're about to be compromised. And even if your data is encrypted, in a few years' time, once we've got quantum computing, it's not going to be encrypted. So, and I don't know if that's true or if that's just internet rumor, but that's what I'm going with. So, assuming you've always been breached, and then working out where the exposure is. So, how do you contain that breach? So, how easy is it for somebody to traverse laterally within your organisation? And these are actually really good, healthy discussions to have. With a small IT function, I started with one person, and we grew it up. When I started the organisation, there were no passwords. So in 2015, I was working in a SME organisation with 100 staff that didn't use passwords, and so these types of things have evolved over time, and now you're in a much healthier place. I'm not sure I can talk much more about zero trust, other than it's something that I think I need to buy a piece of software eventually that does something. But in terms of verification, in terms of my always verifying who's connected and maintaining that verification process on my current application stack, from the risk analysis that we've done, we're okay. But I do think that in the future, I'm going to have to succumb to one of these shiny vendors.
Thanks, Nick. The final round of discussion this evening is around resilience and business continuity. And really, this is around how do we bounce back from that inevitable situation where, as I described at the outset, you crash the motorbike. Can you get back on it? Or is your business so irreparably damaged, either commercially or reputationally, that actually getting the bike going again is very problematic? Organisations need to have a plan for these things. Nick spoke effectively around blast radiuses and minimising lateral movement within the organisation. Some of that can be done through design, some of it through software. Mike, what's your view on all of this? Where are we headed?
Yeah, I think the thing I would say to my teams is have a plan is the key thing. The last thing you want is to be in a situation and not have a plan, right? And sometimes when you're creating these things, you don't realize or don't think, you might be in this situation, but it's way better to have a plan and be prepared and really take this through different scenarios, right? It doesn't take too long to do an exercise where you can find tons of resource online about the different types of things that may and have happened in many organizations and just run through them, right? Half of that comes down to communication. Who makes what decision and when? If you don't know who you're going to call when something's going wrong, that is kind of the first failure that you're going to make. So make sure you have a plan, make sure you know who the kind of cyber team is when something goes wrong and who is going to make certain decisions. From a brand standpoint, that's super important, right? Who communicates with regulators, who communicates externally, who's sending the email to customers if you need to. These are really important things because lots of companies are breached. the companies that survive are often the ones that have a really good plan on how they communicate and protect their brand, and are, in honesty, very honest, transparent, and show that they are trying to do the right thing. There's nothing worse than a headline coming out to say you knew about this for 3 months and did nothing. That is the thing you don't want to happen. So making sure you have that plan. And then the other thing I would say is, identify two things that in terms of infrastructure that is critical. I look at that in two ways. Is it critical because you need it available right now? Or is it critical because it has critical data? And you might have a system, or you might have applications that you can really quickly shut down because they don't need to be on right now. And that might be part of your plan, right? How do you limit the blast radius? If something's spreading through your environment, it's really handy to know what you can shut down without asking permission, because that might be a critical system with critical data, but it doesn't need to be on right now. Versus a system, and I have this a lot, obviously, in manufacturing, where it's like you can't shut that down. That might have a safety issue, or have an issue with supply. Having that knowledge is super important. And then making sure you have a really solid recovery plan, not for everything. Have it for the things that operate your business. If you don't know what makes you money, and if you don't know what the business need to ensure they can continue to sell, they can continue to generate revenue, they can continue to be compliant, that they're the important things to ensure you have that in place and know how you're going to operate and recover those things. Everything else should be noise at that point. You can get to it. That can take weeks and months. But if you haven't planned to recover those things that make you money, then your risk of not being able to recover from a business lens, right? If that is important. So that would be my thing. Have a plan. Make sure you know who you're going to talk to. Make sure you know who's going to talk to your customers and externally. And then make sure you know what's critical to make you money and have a solid recovery plan for it. And my advice there, I always say, if you've looked at NIST, they have their kind of categories. I say under protect, everything should be protected. It doesn't matter if it's critical or non-critical, right? If it can laterally move, it doesn't matter. Protect everything. I always hear this from people. Oh, this is a non-critical system. Don't need to apply security to it. No. You protect everything. But when you get into the recover, detect categories, focus on your critical systems and the things that make you money.
Brilliant. Very precise answer to that, Mike. Thank you so much. We've kind of come to the end of our round of discussion, and it's an opportunity for those on the call who've been listening very patiently to ask any questions they might have for our panelists on any of the questions that they've had at the back of their mind, or things that they've heard that have triggered an interest. Would anyone like to raise their hand and come off mute and ask a question? Well, in the absence, I had one prepared. To the whole panel, if you could give every SME owner one piece of advice that they could act on tomorrow morning, what would it be? I'd like to start with that one, Nick, and then I'll come to you, Mike.
Cyber Essentials Plus. If you don't, until you've done that, I mean, it's a tough question because we don't know the scale or the settings, but Cyber Essentials Plus should be mandatory, because that's where I would expect a lot of SMEs to start to understand their risk.
Great, thanks, Nick. Mike?
I'll slightly cheat and use my last answer. Have a recovery plan for your critical systems.
Okay, we'll go to Mohammed next, and then Alina.
I think the education, if there is enough, basic education is important. And then when it comes to security controls, essentially fundamentals remain same always. So it's a multi-factor authentication is the first control I would I would recommend they need to put into place. That will reduce the attack surface quite a lot. And then it's a consistent process. It's a complex game. It's not one thing, one solution fits for all. Yeah, that's my take on this.
Thank you. Alina?
Yeah, so really interesting talk, very insightful, and I really think that all the speakers made a good point about the advice. And I think I will also cheat as Mike did earlier and use one of my answers and say that SMEs should focus on three main things: maintaining a clear inventory of third-party dependency, enforcing strong identity and access control around API and integration, and planning for vendor compromise, as Mike was saying. Don't assume vendor perfection, assume the worst and prepare for the worst. And in supply chain cybersecurity, resilience is another thing that matters more than trust. And this is, as Mike was saying, limiting blast radius and recovering quickly if a supplier is breached.
Thanks, Alina. I'm not being overwhelmed by a show of hands, so I'll ask another question, and then panel members consider if you feel that you'd like to have a go at this one. If I was a small medium business owner and I discovered tomorrow that my organisation had been breached overnight, what's the single most important thing that I should do in the first hour after discovery?
It's a lot of missing context, so I'll. Yeah, I mean, again, for me, it would be communication, right? If it depends on the size, right? If you've got someone, if you have people that can support you, I would be engaging and ensuring that someone is looking at it, right? There's nothing worse than finding out and assuming that someone else is doing something. So that would be my guidance on the communication topic, and shut things off. But make sure someone's doing something.
Thanks, Mike.
I think containment is what I meant when I said switch stuff off. But in that very first start, you don't know what it's a stressy situation. You are emotionally compromised, yeah, and it is there is a lot going through your head. So it's just about containment and understanding the situation. Do not do anything outside of your organisation until you understand that situation. Yeah, and just something that Mike said during his speech, his presentation. Drafting emails that you would send to customers is much easier when you're not exhausted and you're not stressed. And there are some really good examples that you'll see on your journey as an IT professional from where you receive comms from organizations that have been compromised. I recommend getting a store of those so you have good quality comms ready to go, or the bare bones of it ready to go.
So we've got a great question that's come in from Vijay on the chat, and the question is, what's the best way to deal with stolen information? Well, I suppose, Vijay, you might be referring to ransomware in this as a sort of form of theft, and then it being held to blackmail over getting your data back. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
So one of the, sorry, Mike, sorry, Nick, just a very quick one. Don't pay the ransomware. Don't pay the amount that they are asking, because it's possible that more than likely you're not going to get your data back. They might leak your information, and you're paying that amount of money without actually gaining your data back. That's all from.
So as a principle, I would agree with that, and we have set that in our as a policy. But depending on the nature of that information, we would be with our insurers, and our insurers would have a dedicated negotiation function, and we would understand who the attacker is and what their reliability is. So ransomware attackers are organizations, they're businesses, And so in the event that your data has been stolen by one of these, they actually have their own pressure on them to be trustworthy. If they say they're going to return the data and not share it, then there is you may want to take a different decision about not paying the ransom based on their trust ratings.
Great, thank you, Nick. So we've got two other questions that have come in. Gennady has said, detection is always a question that I get asked. How quickly can you detect an intruder, network or otherwise? And what controls are usually based on actions rather than initial compromise? So what is your advice on how to address that?
I think we measure our detections in average. How quickly, I've seen detections, in under a minute, right, before response, particularly, on the automated response systems we have. It really depends on what you've implemented and how, bold you've gone with some of your automated response, right? Automated response is always a little dangerous. We blocked our CEO before because our automated response saw something he didn't like and just was like, no, and he was traveling. So I had to explain that one to him, and he was very understanding. But, you can detect and respond actually very, very quickly with some level of automation, but you're looking for patterns there. And I would say that you need to measure that in average. One of the things that we've started to do is actually have a slightly different view of just declaring those averages. We've started to use the MITRE framework, and we've said we want to be bottom left. We want to be detecting at the earliest stage, and we want to have the time as low as possible. And so we've started to map not only our data, our real world event data on the MITRE framework, kind of y-axis on time and the MITRE framework, but also start to ingest our kind of pen testing and other simulated tests as well, to look at where we don't get kind of real world events. So I would generally say it's an average. It's difficult to say, I'll always be under a minute. It depends on how they come in and what the tools are.
Thanks. So I'm gonna combine the final two questions into one, and then we will draw tonight's event to a close. Gigi asked around, sort of beyond raising awareness about phishing emails, what can we do to try and heighten staff awareness? I think my response from experience would be to make sure you've got an annual program of effectively recertifying your workforce in cybersecurity, because the landscape is rapidly evolving, and what you thought you knew might now be superseded. And I think that's amplified by the role of AI in all of this. The other point that's come from Michael Woodward is that he says, working in an FE college, we have Cyber Essentials as a mandatory requirement, and that comes from the Department for Education. They're planning on going for Cyber Essentials Plus next year. Is looking at ISO 27001 advisable as a next step? Panel, firstly on that sort of annual recertification of the workforce on basic cybersecurity principles, and then this second question about ISO 27001. What are your thoughts?
So the recertification of the network of the organisation every 12 months, actually it's just a compliance topic, because a lot of my corporate contracts require me to say that I do that. Now, whether there's a value in people spending 30 minutes on a video once a year, I think it's fairly minimal. We have a really good phish awareness campaign, which is maintained throughout the year. And then that's supplemented by comms on active topics that take place, that are going on in the news. And the way I view it is, it's as useful. How many people have not got two-factor authentication on Facebook or LinkedIn and things like this? and what information can they take from the work to share with their family and friends, because that's how you gain awareness and buy-in. So that we always tend to do campaigns around Christmas time, around bogus shoppings, Black Friday deals, where to look, where to avoid, for what to look for in comms. So it's about tailoring and actually supporting the narrative with your business, so it's useful for them and it's not just a compliance piece.
Thanks, Nick. I think at that point we will draw proceedings to a close. I'd like to thank our panelists for giving up some of their time this evening to talk on this really important topic. And I think it's reminded me about how powerful these BCS events can be in disseminating knowledge and years of experience across our working community. So to all of you, thank you so much. And on behalf of BCS Merseyside, thank you and enjoy your evening.